So I don't want this to just be talking about what you should do. I want to go through and look at my ranges, my stats, and use that for kind of, I guess, the framework for what you should be going for, and you can have kind of an idea of what we're trying to do. So here we have some general overall stats from me. This is only my hands from Stars and Full Tilt from the last 3 or 4 years. Couldn't get any other sites for the obvious reasons of they won't send you them. But it's a pretty good sample to look at for us to kind of get a taste for what we should be going for. Now, as you can see, let's really focus on the pre-flop stats. We'll take a look more at the post-flop stuff later. I ended up playing about 91% of my buttons and about 72% of my big blinds. I assume there's a mixture of 3xing and whatnot here that's changed that a bunch. And maybe also playing too tight towards the beginning of the last, I think this is probably the last 4 years of Stars and Full Tilt. So, as far as hands won, I managed to win about 60% of my hands in the small blind and 50% of my hands in the big blind. Guys, that just is straight up what wins you the money. If we look at this in big blinds, obviously I run hot because when you play high stakes, you get there from running hot. It's actually quite funny because the non-showdown is negative in currency because a few of the people I played at the highest stakes are complete animals and you have to value hammer them a bunch. But if you look at my graph in big blinds, it's quite a bit of a different story. Maybe I should have thought about this with how long it would take to load before I clicked it. And now we're paying the price. Feel free to fast forward through this part of the video. There we go. Okay, so we're up to, I won about 290 buy-ins, ran about 60 buy-ins over EV, and won about basically all of my buy-ins in non-showdown. So it's kind of interesting the difference between those two graphs. Anyway, let's move on, get back to what we're going to look at. Let's look at small blind raises. So we're going to look at some of the worst hands I'm telling you to raise. Now, it's going to be kind of skewed in this, which I don't like it that much, but let's look at some of these bottom hands when they do elect to open. The problem with this is going to be that I generally raise these hands into tight big blinds. So these should do okay. Yeah, so okay, this is a pretty good indicator right now. Obviously, you're like, but Doug, you lost almost $1 million and you got dealt these hands. This sucks. That is true. But the thing is, when we play it, that's actually kind of cool to look at. So over the course of my career, or the last 4 years of my career on these sites, I raised it about half the time. And let's actually do this. Let's make VBIP equals true. Because we know if we fold, we lose at 50. So that's good. But let's make it so that we raised first in. So when I played these hands, they lost at 44 big blinds per 100. If I folded, they would have lost at 50. So what this tells me is that I picked good spots to raise them, because if the average of, let's just say that I raise these hands 50% of the time. Well, I obviously raised them against the 50% of opponents that I thought were tighter in the big blind, meaning the additional raises would be at a rate more like minus 50 or minus 60 or minus 70. You should definitely see this in your win rate for these bottom hands because you're going to open them in spots where they're going to be plus EV. Now, in smaller samples, if you have a few big hands, it can drastically change them. That's, definitely changes the dynamic a bit. Let's look at some of the worst suited hands that I would say I've opened like almost always. Let's take a look at some of these guys, because these hands are just too good. They're just simply too good in the small blind. You got to raise them. So these are minus 32. So, well, much better than their offsuit counterparts, and definitely still raises. These should be like 95%. So I guess I had some opponents along the way where I did decide to fold them, and apparently do some limping. That's interesting. Anyway, let's go back to looking at some other bad offsuit hands and see how those performed. I know this isn't the most useful because I'm raising them against weaker opponents, but I just want to show you that you should have times where you do raise these hands. You don't want to look at them like, oh, these are bad hands, I'm never going to raise them. So these next hands up, they got raised more frequently, as you can tell from the fact that they got raised 70% instead of 50%. And they did a lot better. They lost at 37, but when I did raise, they lost at 30. So these bottom hands can definitely be plus EV. Keep in mind the equity required to raise. We went through all of that stuff. That's really important. If you stick to that, it's a really good indicator. And also keep in mind the way your opponents are going to play post-flop. Do they have any weaknesses? For example, if someone flats a ton pre and folds a lot in the flop, I'm definitely looking to open more of these hands than I would in another scenario. Was there anything else that I quickly wanted to look? Okay, let's just look at overall small blind win rate just so you can kind of know what you should be expecting. So I want it 20. Oh, we're going to turn this back on. Sorry about that, guys. This camera freezes sometimes. So we want it 24 big blinds per 100 over the sample. I would try and say you should be able to do at least something in that vicinity, maybe closer to 30, 35. A lot of this has been played against very tough opponents. In general, I would strive for something 20 to 30 in the small blind and minus 10 to 0 in the big blind. Yes, you can get to 0 when you're playing bad people and if you play your big blind appropriately. So I don't want to go too much into the database analysis for the opens because I think that it's extremely based around who I was playing. But just know that you should be willing to go all the way up to that 100% open when given the chance to do so.